He longed for a gentle bride to bring peace to his restless heart, but instead, a towering gunfighter crashed into his world with a chilling promise of both protection and death. Is this stranger his greatest enemy, or the only one who can save him? The town of Ashthorn Ridge stirred with restless anticipation that morning, but none more so than Elias Crow. He stood on the edge of the dusty main street, hat in hand, waiting as the stagecoach rumbled closer in a swirl of grit and heat. For months, he had carried one hope in his heart, that the woman he had written to, a mail-order bride from back east, would step down with a smile soft enough to settle the ache of loneliness that had haunted him since boyhood. His small farm, tucked against the edge of the Red Canyon, was ready. He had painted the shutters, mended the roof, and even planted a patch of wildflowers near the front stoop, though the desert winds were cruel to anything delicate. He imagined her voice filling the kitchen, her laughter brushing away the silence that clung to him like dust. A gentle bride, that was what he dreamed of, and today was the day it would come true. The stagecoach rolled to a halt, horses snorting, leather harnesses creaking. Elias's heart raced as the door creaked open. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then, with a heavy thud, a boot hit the ground. The figure that descended was no small woman with a bonnet and shy eyes. Instead, a towering figure ducked beneath the coach doorframe, broad shoulders, scarred hands, a revolver strapped low on the hip. Her long duster coat snapped in the breeze, and the sun caught the edge of steel beneath it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elias blinked, certain he must be dreaming a different dream altogether. The woman, if she could be called that, without hesitation, stood near 7 feet tall. Her hair was braided back, streaked with dust and fire, and her gaze swept the street like a hawk surveying prey. "Which one of you's Elias Crow?" Her voice carried like a rifle crack, silencing the murmurs. Elias raised a tentative hand. His throat had gone dry. She strode toward him, boots thudding, each step measured and unstoppable. When she stopped, she loomed above him, shadow blotting out the Sunday. "I'm Maera Vey," she said flatly, "the one who answered your letter." Elias's jaw worked, but no words came. His heart twisted. This wasn't the soft-spoken bride he had prayed for. This was something else entirely. Maera leaned closer, her scarred lips curling in something between a smile and a warning. "You ask for someone to stand beside you. Well, here I am. I'll protect you." She let the silence hang for a moment, sharp as a drawn blade. "Or kill you. That's the only vow I make." The townsfolk scattered their whispers through the dust. Some chuckled nervously, others shook their heads. Elias stood frozen, staring up at the giant who had just claimed his life in front of all Ashthorn Ridge. His dream of a gentle bride had shattered in an instant, replaced by the towering shadow of a woman whose very presence promised chaos. If you think Elias's dream just turned into a nightmare, wait until you see what Maera does next. Elias Crow had always imagined the walk home with his bride would be quiet, perhaps shy. He had pictured himself carrying her small trunk of belongings while she glanced at the wildflowers he'd planted by the fence. Instead, he trudged beside Maera Vey, whose long strides nearly doubled his pace. She carried her own heavy pack with ease, as though it weighed less than a loaf of bread. Every clank from the revolver at her side reminded him that this was no gentlewoman, but a fighter with blood still clinging to her shadow. Ashthorn Ridge was abuzz after her arrival. Storefront doors opened just to catch a glimpse. Children darted out, then retreated at their mother's sharp whispers. By the time Elias and Maera left the main street, the whole town seemed stitched with murmurs. "Your people sure do talk," Maera said, not even turning her head. "They're curious," Elias muttered. His hands were damp on his hat brim. She glanced down at him with a smirk that was more steel than humor. "Let 'em. I've walked through towns that spat my name like venom. This one feels tame." When they reached the farmhouse, Elias hesitated at the gate, his heart clenched at the sight of the flowers, already drooping in the dry wind. He had planted them for someone soft and gentle. For a moment, he thought Meera might laugh at the foolishness of it. But she didn't laugh. Instead, she stopped, bent down, and touched one of the petals with her roughened fingers. "Fragile little things," she murmured, almost too low for him to hear. "Funny they're still standing in a place like this." Then she rose, as if she hadn't revealed anything at all, and pushed open the gate without waiting for him. Inside, Meera tossed her pack on the kitchen table and claimed the chair nearest the window. Her wide frame filled the small room until Elias felt like a child in his own home. She leaned back, boots on the floorboards, and surveyed the place like it was already hers. "You've got decent land," she said finally. "But it's too open. A man could ride right up to your door and shoot you dead before you set your coffee down." Elias blinked, unsettled by her bluntness. I never had trouble before." "You do now," she replied, her eyes narrowing at the horizon beyond the window. Words already running through the ridge. "A woman like me draws old debts like flies to a carcass. If they come looking, they'll come here." Elias's stomach knotted. He hadn't asked for this. He had asked for peace, for warmth. Instead, he had inherited danger in the shape of a giant. Meera seemed to sense his unease. She leaned forward, voice low and sure. "Listen, Elias Crow. You brought me here. Whether you meant to or not, I'm bound to you. And I don't run. This farm, this town, they're mine now. Anyone who comes for you will answer me." Elias swallowed hard. The gentle dream he had clung to was slipping further away with each word she spoke. Yet deep inside, against his better judgment, a flicker of something stirred, not comfort, not trust, but the terrifying possibility that his life was about to change forever. By the next morning, Ashthorn Ridge had turned Meera Vey into a story. Elias heard it in the market while buying feed, whispered questions curling through the crowd like smoke. "Did you see the size of her hands?" one woman hissed. "They say she once killed a man with a single punch," another replied. "Not a woman at all, but a curse wearing boots," muttered a third. Elias paid quickly and left, the weight of their words heavy in his ears. He had wanted a bride who might be welcomed with warmth, someone the town could help him build a life with. Instead, he found himself the unwilling keeper of a legend that frightened the people he had known all his life. When he returned to the farm, Meera was already outside, hauling lumber from the shed as if it weighed no more than kindling. Elias dropped the feed sack on the porch and froze. She had driven stakes into the earth along the fence line and was laying planks across them, fortifying his quiet homestead into something closer to a barricade. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice cracking between confusion and alarm. "Making sure you don't get shot in your sleep," Meera said. Sweat glistened on her brow, but her arms moved with relentless rhythm. "Your land's too open. Bad men love to be open." "I've never had enemies," Elias protested. "Nobody rides out here but neighbors." Meera slammed a plank into place so hard the nails shuddered. Then she looked at him, eyes dark with something older than anger. "You have enemies now. They just don't know it yet." Her words echoed through him, and though he wanted to argue, the certainty in her tone silenced him. That night, Elias sat by the lamp in his kitchen, staring at the flame while Meera cleaned her revolver across the table. The weapon gleamed in the glow, each part polished with the care of a priest tending to holy relics. She hummed a low tune under her breath, deep, almost mournful, and it unsettled him more than the gun itself. "Why are you here, Meera?" he asked finally. "Why answer my letter? Surely you had no interest in being a bride." She paused, the revolver half assembled in her hands. A shadow crossed her face, but she didn't meet his eyes. "You asked for someone to stand beside you. Maybe I was tired of standing alone." Then, with a snap, she slid the revolver back together and holstered it. Elias sat in silence, long after she went to bed. Her words should have comforted him, but they only deepened his unease. Somewhere beneath her scars and steel, Maera carried secrets heavy enough to bow the strongest back. And now, those secrets had come to rest in his home. Out in the night, coyotes howled. Elias thought of the townsfolk's whispers and shivered. For the first time since he planted his flowers, he wondered if Ashthorn Ridge itself might not survive what had just stepped off that stagecoach. The next days passed in a blur of hammering, digging, and dust. Elias Crow's quiet farm, once a place of still mornings and gentle routines, was being reshaped under Maera Vey's relentless command. She tore down the rotting fence and rebuilt it higher, reinforced with timber strong enough to slow a charging horse. She dug firing notches into the barn walls, as if preparing for a siege. Elias followed her work with growing unease. He had never held a gun longer than it took to scare a fox from the henhouse, yet here was this giant woman turning his homestead into a stronghold. "You're wasting your strength," he said one morning as Maera lifted a heavy beam onto her shoulder. "This is a farm, not a fort." Maera set the beam down with a thud that rattled the ground. And what happens when men come riding through that canyon? When they smell weakness in the air? "You'll thank me when these walls hold." Elias wanted to argue, but her certainty left him fumbling for words. He busied himself feeding the hens, pretending not to notice the fortress rising around him. Later that day, she found him repairing the harness in the shed. Without a word, she picked up one of his old rifles from the wall and tested the action. The click of the mechanism sent a shiver up his spine. "You'll need to learn," she said, handing it to him. "I've no wish to fire at anyone," Elias replied, pushing it back. Her gaze sharpened, a storm behind her eyes. "Wishing won't keep you alive. You asked for someone to stand beside you, Crow. Well, I'm standing, but I won't always be fast enough for both of us." The weight of the rifle lingered in his hands after she left, as heavy as the truth she'd spoken. That evening, they ate in silence. Elias watched Maera as she tore bread and chewed with the weariness of someone who had lived too long in battlefields. Her scarred knuckles were thick with calluses, her frame built for endurance. And yet, when she reached for her cup, her hand lingered over the flowers he had placed on the table. For a fleeting second, her face softened, and Elias glimpsed something buried deep beneath the armor. It unsettled him more than her strength. When darkness fell, Elias walked the perimeter of his land. The walls Maera had built loomed tall in the moonlight, shadows cutting strange angles across the fields. His dream of a home filled with warmth and laughter felt further away with every plank she nailed down. Yet he could not deny the stir of safety that pressed against his unease. Perhaps he resented her claim, but in the silence of the night, with coyotes prowling the ridge, he also understood this much. Maera Vey was a wall of flesh and fire standing between him and a world he had never dared to face. And whether he welcomed it or not, she was here to stay. Ashthorn Ridge was no stranger to drifters, but the day the Crimson Spurs rode in, the air itself seemed to tighten. Elias Crow was in town trading flour for seed when he heard the first hoofbeats. Dust rose like smoke as a dozen riders swept down the main street, red cloth tied around their arms, spurs glinting like drops of blood in the Sunday. The townsfolk scattered to the edges, pulling children inside. Even the dogs slunk low. Elias felt his chest hollow as the riders reined in before the saloon, their leader swinging down with a cruel smile plastered beneath a jagged scar. Sheriff Dunwild appeared from his office, tipping his hat with a courtesy that rang false. "Didn't expect you boys back this way," he said, voice flat but not unfriendly. The scarred leader, later Elias, would learn his name was Holt Garrow, grinned wider. "Ashthorn Ridge has grown, Sheriff. We hear one of your farmers has land worth a fortune in water rights. Canyon runs straight through it." Elias's stomach dropped. He didn't need Maera's warnings to know they meant him. By the time he returned home, sweat slick on his palms, Maera was already waiting at the gate. Her expression told him she'd heard. Perhaps the whole ridge had felt the spurs' arrival. "They'll come for your land," she said bluntly. "Men like that don't knock on doors polite-like. They'll torch the place and bury you under the ashes." Elias's throat tightened. "The sheriff, he'll—" Maera cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Sheriff Dunwild's as crooked as a canyon trail. He'll stand aside, maybe even hold the torch for them." She turned toward the horizon, her hand resting on the revolver at her hip. "Holt Garrow. I should have known he'd crawl back sooner or later." Elias blinked. "You know him?" Her jaw clenched. "He's a debt I never paid, a wound left open, and now he's here." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. The silence pressed heavy between them until finally he whispered, "This was never supposed to be my fight." Maera's eyes softened, though her voice remained iron. "It became yours the moment you asked for someone to stand beside you. You didn't get a bride, Crow. You got me. And with me comes every shadow I've ever cast." That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring out at the canyon rim where moonlight traced jagged lines across the land. His farm was no longer a sanctuary. It was a beacon, drawing wolves. From the barn came the faint sound of Maera sharpening her blade, steel against stone in steady rhythm. Each scrape echoed through the night. A grim reminder, the Crimson Spurs weren't just a story now. They were coming, and when they did, Ashthorn Ridge would bleed. The dawn after the Spurs' arrival broke red across the canyon, a warning written on the sky. Elias Crow stood by the well, drawing water in silence, while Maera Vey moved through the yard with restless energy. She checked the rifle slits in the barn, tested the fence posts she'd driven into the earth, and paced the ridgeline like a sentinel carved from stone. Elias's chest burned with unspoken words. For days he had swallowed his disappointment, his grief for the life he had imagined. But now, with the Crimson Spurs closing in, the weight could no longer be carried. "Stop," he said, sharper than he'd ever spoken to her. Maera froze mid-step, turning slowly. "What?" "This." He gestured at the farm at the high fence, the barricaded barn, the rifle leaning against the porch rail. "I didn't ask for this. I asked for a wife, Maera, a partner to share the quiet, someone gentle enough to make this place a home." Her brow furrowed, though her stance never softened. "And you think gentleness would keep you alive when Holt Garrow comes riding?" "I think gentleness was all I wanted," Elias shot back. "You barged into my life, claimed my land, and now every outlaw in the territory knows where to find me. You've turned my dream into a nightmare." For a long moment, Maera didn't move. Then she strode forward until she towered over him, her shadow swallowing his own. Her voice came low, fierce, but threaded with something rawer than anger. "You think I chose this life? You think I wanted to be made of scars and steel? Crow, I buried every dream I ever had under the bodies of men who came for me, and I swore an oath that led me here." Elias's hands tightened on the rope of the bucket. "What oath?" Her jaw worked, as though the words tasted like ash. "Once, years ago, a woman I owed everything asked me to protect her kin if ever they called. She died before I could repay her. When your letter reached me, I saw her hand in it, saw a chance to honor her last breath." The revelation struck Elias silent. He hadn't expected destiny or debts, only a woman to share his table. Maera looked away, toward the canyon rim glowing in morning light. "You wanted a bride, Crow. Instead, you got me. And I'll tell you this plain. I'll keep you breathing, even if it means burning this whole ridge to the ground. That's the only vow I know how to keep." Elias felt the sting of her words settle deep in his chest. He wanted to hate her for it, but beneath the steel he heard something else, sorrow sharp as any blade. The bucket rope slipped from his fingers, the water spilling across the dirt. He turned away, unable to look at her. and whispered the truth that frightened him most. "You're not the bride I wanted, Mayra, but I'm starting to fear you might be the only one I'll ever have." The fire came just after midnight. Elias Crow woke to the smell of smoke and the crackle of flames tearing through timber. He staggered from his bed, heart hammering, and saw the barn ablaze, an orange inferno against the black canyon sky. The livestock screamed, penned inside, hooves thundering in panic. Before Elias could even pull on his boots, Mayra Ve was already outside. She moved like a storm loosed upon the earth, hauling open the barn doors with a strength that seemed beyond human. Horses bolted into the night, their manes lit with sparks, and Mayra shouted after them, her voice steady even as the roof began to collapse. Gunfire cracked from the ridge. Shadows flickered in the firelight, men on horseback, their red bandanas glowing like brands. The crimson spurs had come. Elias ducked behind the well, fear locking his limbs. The rifles spoke again, bullets sparking off the stones near his head. He could hear laughter riding the wind, cruel and taunting. Then Mayra answered. She strode out into the open, revolver drawn, her massive frame outlined in fire. The first shot she fired dropped a rider clean from his saddle. Another man raised his gun too slow. Mayra's second shot split the night, and he crumpled into the dirt. The spurs faltered, wheeling their mounts as the giant woman advanced. She moved with terrifying calm, each step purposeful, each pull of the trigger precise. A third rider tried to circle wide. Mayra's knife flashed, spinning end over end before sinking into his chest. Elias could barely breathe. He had never seen such violence, never believed one person could carve through a gang like thunder through dry wood. The air stank of gunpowder and burning hay. And all the while, Mayra pressed forward, unflinching, unbreakable. The spurs scattered at last, their leader's voice rising above the chaos. "This isn't over, Ve. You'll pay for every drop spilled tonight." Holt Garrow's silhouette lingered on the ridge, his scar catching the firelight before he vanished into the darkness. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the barn, collapsing into embers. Elias stumbled from his cover, his knees weak. The barn, his livelihood, his father's legacy was gone. Smoke curled toward the stars, carrying the smell of ruin. Mayra stood in the yard, chest heaving, revolver smoking in her hand. Her face was streaked with ash, her braids singed, but her eyes burned brighter than the flames. She turned to Elias, her voice hard. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Holt Garrow won't stop until one of us is buried in that canyon." Elias looked at her, at the giant who had slaughtered men to protect him, who had turned his farm into a battlefield. Terror twisted inside him, but alongside it, something else pulsed. The unbearable truth that without her, he would already be dead. The barn smoldered, the night reeked of blood, and Ashtorn Ridge would never sleep as peacefully again. The barn smoldered through the following day, leaving only a skeleton of charred beams and the bitter scent of ash. Elias Crow spent the morning hauling water, dousing the last stubborn flames, while Mayra Ve sharpened her knife in silence. They spoke little. Every creak of the scorched wood seemed to whisper of loss. When night fell, Elias lit a small fire by the porch. He sat on the steps, staring into the flames, while Mayra leaned against a post, her shadow stretching long across the yard. For once, her revolver rested, holstered at her side. The stillness was heavy, almost fragile. Finally, Elias broke it. "You knew their leader." Mayra's jaw tightened. She looked into the fire rather than at him. "Holt Garrow. Years ago, he rode with a gang I crossed. He wasn't their leader then, just a wild-eyed boy with too much rage in him. I spared his life when I should have ended it. Thought maybe mercy would change him." Her voice roughened, the weight of memory dragging each word. "Instead, he took it as weakness. Swore he'd hunt me down one day. Looks like that day's come." Elias shifted, unease crawling beneath his skin. So this isn't about me at all. It's about you. She finally met his eyes, and in hers, he saw no denial. He'll use you to break me. He already started. Burning your barn was a message. His way of saying, I can't protect anything. Elias's hands curled into fists. And he's right. Everything I built is gone. My father raised that barn with his own hands. Now it's ash because of you. The words slipped out sharper than he intended, but he didn't take them back. Myra flinched, though her face quickly hardened. If you blame me. I'll carry that weight. But don't fool yourself, Crow. Holt would have come for this land whether I was here or not. Water in this desert is worth more than gold. You just made yourself a target by living. Elias turned back to the fire, anger and despair warring in his chest. He wanted to curse her, to drive her away. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw her standing against the spurs alone, defiant, saving him when he had cowered. Without her, he would be lying in the dirt, alongside the men she shot down. Her voice softened, almost reluctant. You think I'm a monster, and maybe I am. But you should know, I never meant to end up here. I just couldn't ignore your letter, not when it sounded so much like a plea. Elias looked up sharply. My letter? She nodded. You wrote of wanting someone to stand beside you. You didn't ask for love. You asked for survival. That's why I came. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the night. Elias stared into the glow, heart aching with a truth he didn't want to accept. Maybe, just maybe, Myra Vey was the only answer his call had ever been destined to bring. Ashthorn Ridge awoke to the thunder of hooves. Dust rolled through the streets as Holt Garrow rode at the head of the Crimson Spurs, flanked not only by his men but by uniformed lawmen from the county seat. Their badges gleamed in the sunlight, though their eyes carried the same hunger as the outlaws beside them. Elias Crow watched from his farm gate, heart pounding. Myra Vey stood at his side, shoulders squared, her massive frame a wall between him and the riders. Her revolver rested easy on her hip, as though it had always belonged there. Holt reined in before them, his scar twisting into a smile. Crow, he called, voice carrying across the field. Your land's wanted by the county now. Sheriff Dunwild filed the papers himself. You can hand it over, or we'll take it from your corpse. Elias swallowed, the weight of despair pressing on him. He opened his mouth, but Myra stepped forward first. You always were a coward, Holt, she said, her tone calm as steel, hiding behind the badges you bought. Holt's smile faltered, then sharpened. Still breathing, Myra? I'll fix that today. The lawmen shifted, rifles in hand. Townsfolk had gathered at the edges of the road, their faces pale, trapped between fear of the spurs and shame for their silence. Elias felt their stares drilling into him, waiting to see if he would fold. Myra leaned closer to him, voice low. This is your land, Crow. Speak for it, or it'll be lost forever. Her words burned through him. He had spent his life avoiding fights, praying for peace. But peace was ash now, scattered with the barn. Slowly, Elias stepped forward. His voice shook at first, but grew steadier. This land belonged to my father, and his before him. I won't hand it to thieves wearing tin stars. If you want it, you'll have to bleed for it. A murmur swept through the crowd. Holt barked a laugh. The farmers found a backbone. Myra, look what you've done made him ready for the grave. Then, with a sharp gesture, he drew. The world narrowed to gunfire. Myra moved first, faster than Elias thought possible. Her revolver barked thunder, dropping one outlaw before Holt's bullet split the air where she had stood. Elias ducked, fumbling for the rifle she had pressed into his hands days before. He raised it, heart in his throat, and fired. The shot went wild, but it scattered the riders long enough for Myra to press forward. She and Holt circled in the dust, two ghosts from an old war finally brought to reckoning. Holt lunged, pistol flashing. Myra's shot answered, striking him square in the chest. He staggered, eyes wide with disbelief, before crumpling into the dirt. Silence rippled out. The spurs broke, scattering into the canyon. The lawmen hesitated, then dropped their rifles and fled. Ashtorn Ridge's townsfolk surged forward at last, not to curse Elias or Maera, but to stand with them. A cheer rose thin at first, then growing. For the first time, Elias saw something shift in Maera's face. Not triumph, not rage, but the faintest release of a burden carried too long. The last duel was over, but what remained between them was only beginning. Weeks passed after the duel, and Ashtorn Ridge began to breathe again. The crimson spurs had scattered, Holt Garrow lay buried on the edge of the canyon, and Sheriff Dunwild no longer wore his badge run out of town by the very people he'd betrayed. For Elias Crow, life felt both familiar and utterly changed. The fields still needed plowing, the hens still clucked for feed, but every chore seemed colored by the memory of fire and gun smoke. What had once been a farmer's life had become something forged in battle. Maera Vey stayed. She never asked permission, never sought thanks. Each morning she patrolled the ridge, scanning for dust trails. Each evening she mended what the spurs had broken: the fences, the barn, the spirit of a place nearly lost. Her presence loomed as large as ever, but Elias no longer shrank from her shadow. One afternoon, as they rebuilt the barn's frame, Elias paused with a beam balanced on his shoulder. "I dreamed of a gentle bride," he said quietly. Maera hammered a nail into place without looking up. "And instead you got me." He nodded. "Yes, and if I'm honest, at first I thought it a curse, but now," he set the beam into its slot, meeting her eyes, "now I think it may have been the only blessing that would have kept me alive." For the first time, Maera's mouth curved into something not sharp or mocking, but almost shy. She brushed sawdust from her scarred hands. "I don't know how to be gentle, Elias, but I can be true, if you'll have that." "I'll take it," he answered. And he meant it. As the weeks stretched into months, the farm came alive again. Wildflowers bloomed where the ashes had fallen. The townsfolk, once fearful of Maera's presence, began to treat her with a wary respect. Children followed her down the street, wide-eyed at the giant who had saved their parents' town. Some even whispered her name as if it were part of a legend already. At night, Elias and Maera sat by the porch fire. He would speak of the day's work, of fences mended or seeds planted, while she listened in her steady silence. Sometimes, when the fire burned low, she told him fragments of the road she had walked before tales of battles survived, of losses endured. He never judged her. He only listened, letting the weight she carried settle lighter between them. Ashtorn Ridge had been scarred, but like the land itself, it endured. And in the quiet between battles, Elias realized his dream had not been shattered. It had only been reshaped. He had wanted someone to share his life with, someone who could stand beside him. Fate had simply chosen a fiercer answer than he expected. One evening, as the canyon wind stirred the flames, Maera raised her cup. "To survive," she said. Elias touched his cup to hers. "To beginnings." And in the firelight, their vow was sealed not of gentleness, but of strength, forged in blood, and carried forward into whatever storms might come. If this tale kept you hooked, don't forget to like and subscribe.